A telephone rings in a quiet house outside Vancouver. An old man picks it up. Is this Mr. Franz Stiegler? Yeah, this is he. The Franz Stiegler who flew in World War II? A pause. Confusion, maybe caution. Yeah. Franz, I think we go way back. This is Charlie Brown. Neither man says anything for a moment. Then the American on the line starts asking questions. Small, specific, almost clinical. Where the plane was hit, what was missing from it, what state the tail was in. He isn't making conversation. He's testing him. There is one fact this man has never told a living soul. Not his wife, not the men who spent 4 years helping him search. He wrote it down nowhere, not in the letter that led to this call, not in any interview, not once in 47 years. If the stranger on the other end of the line is who he claims to be, he'll know it without being told. 47 years earlier, these two men had met only once, in the sky, as enemies, during a war neither of them had chosen to fight. He takes a breath and asks the question he's been saving since that day. Bremen, Germany, December 20th, 1943. A young American pilot named Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown was flying his first mission in command of a B-17 bomber. He was 21. He told his crew he was 25, hoping 4 extra years would earn him some respect in the cockpit. The target was a factory deep inside German airspace, part of a formation of nearly 500 bombers. The sky above it was thick with anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. Charlie's bomber took the worst of it. 1 engine gone, another barely holding. Half the crew wounded, 1 man already dead in the tail. A hole was torn clean through the fuselage, large enough to see daylight through, and cold enough at that altitude that the wind screaming through it froze blood before it could even finish spilling. By any reasonable measure, the plane should not have been able to fly. It flew anyway, shuddering, the engine straining in a way you could feel through the floor before you could hear it, because Charlie kept it in the air by refusing to accept that it couldn't. His crew wanted to bail out over enemy ground. Charlie refused. He climbed just high enough to give them a fair chance if they still wanted to jump, then leveled off and pointed the nose toward home. At another airfield, not far away, a German fighter pilot was having a very different morning. Charlie had no way of knowing it yet, but the hardest part of his day hadn't started, and it was about to have a face. On the ground near a German airfield, a fighter pilot heard the bomber before he saw it. A low, wounded drone, coming in far too slow and far too close to the earth. He was already strapped into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt within a minute of the sound. He'd already shot down more than 20 enemy planes. 1 more kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest decoration. He took off without waiting for clearance, no one firing back. He came up behind the bomber, expecting a fight. Instead, he found a machine that shouldn't have still been airborne. A shattered tail, gun positions torn open, no one firing back. He eased in close enough to see why. The tail gunner hadn't survived the attack. Through the holes in the fuselage, he could see the rest of the crew, huddled together, tending to their wounded. He had a clear shot. He had every reason, by the rules he'd been trained under, to take it. He didn't take it. Instead, he pulled his fighter up alongside the bomber's wing, close enough that his wingtip nearly touched theirs, close enough that Charlie could see the man's face clearly through 2 panes of glass, close enough to make out the shape of his mouth, forming words no one could hear over the engines. Inside the cockpit, Charlie looked over and saw an enemy fighter sitting 3 feet off his wing, and for a second he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. He closed his eyes. He opened them again. The fighter was still there.
"He's going to destroy us," Charlie told his co-pilot. His hands were already shaking on the controls before he said it.
He wasn't wrong to think it. What he didn't know yet was that the German pilot had already made the opposite decision and was now trying, with nothing but hand signals through 2 panes of glass, to get an enemy crew to understand that he was trying to save them, not finish them off. He pointed east toward neutral ground, mouthing a word Charlie couldn't make out. Charlie had no idea what he meant. He ordered a gunner to try to chase the fighter off. The German pilot never fired. He held formation, wingtip to wingtip, past the coastal gun batteries, where soldiers who'd been trained their whole careers to shoot down anything in the sky held their fire instead, unsure what they were looking at.
He stayed until the water below them turned to open sea, and the danger had passed. Then he pulled up, saluted the men who, hours earlier, he'd been ordered to kill, and turned back toward Germany without a word of explanation. Charlie never learned his name. He never even learned why.
Over the open water, still losing altitude, still certain they might not make it, 2 shapes streaked past the cockpit window fast enough to make every man on board flinch. Fighters. For a terrible second, nobody knew whose. Then the shapes banked, and the markings caught the light. American stars.
"Little friends!" the gunner screamed into Charlie's ear, half deaf from his own gunfire, grinning like a kid. 2 P-47s took position on the wing and led them the rest of the way home, straight toward a runway the crew couldn't have found on their own. The bomber made it back to England on fumes and willpower, both engines failing before it reached the runway. Charlie brought it down anyway, and when it finally rolled to a stop, the silence afterward was almost worse than the noise had been. No more engines, no more wind through the holes in the fuselage, just his own breathing and his hands still shaking on the controls.
He sat still in his seat for a long moment before he could make himself move. When his boots hit the ground, his legs gave out from under him. A young officer knelt beside him, asking if he was all right. What a hell of a way to start a war, Charlie told him. It was the only thing he could think to say. He was alive. His crew was alive. But he had no idea who the other pilot had been, or why a man with every reason to kill him had chosen not to. It would take him almost half a century to find out.
Charlie tried to tell people what had happened in the sky that day. He was told in no uncertain terms to stop talking about it. An enemy showing mercy wasn't something anyone in 1943 wanted printed in a newspaper. The file was marked classified, and the war followed him home anyway. Some nights, decades later, he still woke gasping from the same dream. The wind screaming through a hole in the fuselage, his plane spinning toward the ground, no one there to help him. It took Charlie 4 years of writing letters and chasing dead ends most people would have given up on long before. He wrote to the U.S. Air Force's own historical branch first, certain a mission that dramatic had to be on record somewhere. Nothing came back. For 3 years, a British veterans organization tried to help him track down the pilot. They had contacts, archives, decades of institutional memory. They came back with nothing, too. As far as anyone official was concerned, the encounter had never happened. Charlie kept going anyway. He wrote next to a German fighter pilot's newsletter, hoping a name buried in a story from 1943 might jog someone's memory, decades later, on the other side of an ocean. In Vancouver, the man he was searching for had already made peace with never knowing. Franz believed by then that he would go the rest of his life without finding out whether the crew of that bomber had made it home.
Then, in January 1990, an old man in Vancouver opened his mail and found a stranger's letter describing a battered bomber over Germany decades earlier. He read it once, then he shouted for his wife. He sat down at his typewriter that same afternoon and wrote back. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't ask to be famous, or thanked, or believed. He simply said that he'd always wondered whether that bomber made it home, and that he was glad to hear it had. 5 days later, in Florida, Charlie opened an envelope and read a letter from a man who claimed to be the pilot he'd spent 4 years looking for. He wanted to believe it. He'd learned over a long career not to. So he picked up the phone. Back on that January afternoon, mid-call, Charlie has said nothing about the water. In every letter, every interview, every retelling, he had only ever said the encounter happened over land. He never once mentioned that the fighter had stayed with them past the coastline, out over open water. "When I let you go over the sea," the voice on the other end says, unprompted, "I thought you'd never make it across." Charlie's grip tightens on the receiver. His throat closes before he can get a word out. Tears are running down his face, and he doesn't try to stop them. "My God," he finally says, his voice breaking on every word. "It is you." There's more he wants to know, now that the doubt is gone. "What were you pointing for?" he asks. "You kept pointing and trying to tell us something." "To get you to land in Sweden," the man tells him, his own voice catching. "I had no idea," Charlie says. "Otherwise, I'd have flown there myself, and I'd still be speaking Swedish today." Two men who had once flown wingtip to wingtip over the North Sea, close enough to see the fear on each other's faces, close enough that the wrong decision by either one would have ended it. Two men who never exchanged a single word in the sky that day, talked for the first time in their lives. Not as enemies, not even really as strangers. They had already known each other for 47 years. They just hadn't met yet.